Hi, I'm Milla and welcome to Milla's Game Room video. This video is going to be about something that is quite topical given recent announcements, and that is there even a point in consoles anymore? Following the reveal of the PlayStation 5 Pro or PlayStation 5.5 Digital Only Edition, I think it's more relevant than ever. And so instead of making a generic quick reaction video going over everything that people have already said about the thing, which I have things to say myself, I figured let's take the time and broaden out a bit more and talk about consoles in general, because things like the Switch 2 and Xbox, they're all things that need to be factored in as well. So if discussion videos like this and discussion about visual novels, JRPGs and various other things are of interest to you, please consider liking and subscribing now. So let's get straight into it. So first off, I'm going to talk about the PlayStation 5, then Xbox, and then finally the Switch and PC, because I think it's important to establish a bit more about where everyone is at. So starting with the PlayStation 5 Pro, which is the newest PlayStation 5, which got announced at $700 USD, no disc drive, no vertical stand. Elsewhere in the world, it's even more expensive. In the UK, it's more expensive in Europe, and Japan, 120,000 yen for that thing, which, yeah, that is just fucking extortionate. It is very US-centric pricing, and it's not good. I was actually laughing during that whole reveal trailer. There were two forms of entertainment that day for me, one of which was the PlayStation 5 Pro reveal. You're showing games that already come out running on this hardware, and it looks exactly the same as on both sides. The comparison doesn't really exist. And it really sums up consoles in general. The PlayStation 5 and everything to do with that has just generally been a bit lackluster. It's very much, if you don't care about Western AAA blockbusters, there is basically nothing for you on PlayStation anymore, unless it's Astro Bot, which is very poetic given what happened to Japan Studio. And that's where PlayStation is in a state of decline. And they're basically done in Japan, and I'm going to come back to that later because it touched on the future. As for Xbox, Microsoft are in a very similar situation with that system. They're already softening the blow for people because there are people that still think that having an Xbox is a good investment, but Microsoft are just bringing everything to PC now. That's what their plan is. I think eventually we're not going to get a new Xbox system. They're going to end the library and just have it as be a third-party publisher and have all their games on all platforms, and also very Western as well. This is because Xbox Game Pass has not been a big success and there's been lots of layoffs. Just before recording this, Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, is now laying off even more people, 600 odd people, probably more than that. Xbox is in a state as well, and that part of that's because of all the Activision Blizzard stuff and just all other things out the scope of this video. And then we have Nintendo and the Switch and Switch 2. Now I'm recording this before the Switch 2 is announced. At the time of recording, there's lots of rumours going around that Nintendo could reveal it in as little as a week after recording. So what I'm going to say now relates to what we believe about the Switch now and the Switch 2, and then if there's any major updates, I'll just make an update later. So, first off, the Switch has largely bucked these trends that have hit PlayStation and Xbox. There, for a start, AA games are more of a thing, including dormant IP. Nintendo, you can criticise them for a lot of things, but they do treat their IP with respect than Sony and Microsoft, and that includes things that aren't the biggest budget. And that's a really good thing, because we really need more IP that's not the same shit, and Nintendo are good at understanding that. However, it is worth noting with the Switch 2 is a lot of people believe the system should be replaced by now. It is an aging console, and there are a lot of bad ports and less Western AAA ports and other big things. I think it's reasonable to want a new release. I mostly play the games that aren't that demanding on consoles and PC, so I'm kind of neutral on that. Okay, I get it, but I'm fine about it. And as for the Switch 2, there are a bunch of rumours, like the Switch will be backwards compatible, physical games, exclusives, cheaper than PS5 Pro, and will likely dominate the Japanese market. That's what will likely be the case for the Switch 2. And then we get to PC gaming, which, that, if anything, has had the greatest resurgence, I think, because Steam Deck, for a start, the various competitors to the Steam Deck, and then all the other things that become exclusive to PC, which draws a lot of people to it, like accessibility, mods, digital games, and various other things, charity bundles like Humble Bundle, all these things, and of course PC gaming, there's been no physical games for a very long time, and well, even if you like hentai games or physical Kickstarters, now they're getting rarer too, so no physical games on PC anymore, unless you like pornography, and even then it's all USB drives, so I want to touch a bit more now on defend consoles a bit, because there are still reasons to have consoles, and then talk about things that, well, there aren't reasons to have consoles anymore. So in defense of consoles, Accessibility! You can just plug in and play, you take a game out, or even download it, you just put it on the console, disc in, go, it plays. You're only developing for one set of hardware. Console gaming has always had this sense of accessibility compared to PC gaming, and it's got a great collector market as well. Plug in and play, get physical games. It has a great vibrance to it, and even the PlayStation 5 Pro, as shitty as that system is, it still has this perk, because you can just download a game or a disc drive if you're foolish enough to pay extra for a disc drive on a bloody digital-only console. You can plug and play it that way. That's how it works. It's very simple. And even if I got a PlayStation 5 Pro, I would still have an easier time with that than the Steam Deck, where I've had issues with stuff sometimes, like reinstalling bloody mods. And also, as I mentioned earlier, physical games, you can get them cheap online, less DRM restrictions. There are a few exceptions, but generally there are less DRM restrictions. And of course, the communities as well. I found that collecting communities, when you're not in the toxic dude bro spaces, they can be really good. You can make lots of friends. Even on sites like YouTube, there are lots of JRPG YouTubers that love physical games, for example. Even visual fans that are physical games, assuming they're not mainly on PC. But they're still there, and you can make friends. Of course, there is a flip side to this, why there's no point in consoles. The big one, the loss of exclusive games. Now, this is mostly associated with both Sony and Microsoft, because if you wait, you can now get pretty much anything they make that's a big title on PC, because they will bring stuff to Steam, which is a good thing for the consumer, because you can play where you want, have more versatility. And in the case of both Sony and Microsoft, they don't have their own handheld, so if you have a Steam Deck, you can technically play Sony games portably. And of course, this does apply to Nintendo as well, but not the same way. For those who don't know, the Switch was hacked within the first year of its life. So there are gaping mods out there. If anyone wonders why the first hardware revision for the Switch exists, it's because Nintendo had to release this new revision to fix the hardware flaw with the original Switch, because you could hack it with a paperclip. Like, it's easy to do, and they could do nothing other than release a new system. It was a literal hardware flaw. And what that does mean now is you can emulate Switch games on PC, Steam Deck, and other systems like that, and it will run better than they do on Switch. Even for things like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which is notorious for having a bad handheld port, and I was foolish enough to play it in handheld port when I should have done it in front of the TV when I had the option to back then, but that's a tangent. You can play it on TV, it looks better, it plays better. So for many people, there was no incentive to even get Switch stuff anymore. You could just buy it on PC. Well, not buy it on PC, you can't buy it on PC. So you're just going to pirate because Nintendo don't put their stuff on PC. So for many people, the Switch as a console was becoming redundant. There are lots of physical games. A lot of people believe this is inevitable. It hasn't happened yet. Sony and Microsoft are certainly trying. You've seen it with the PS5 Pro and the disc drive shit. And a lot of people believe, and this is understandable, if you can't get games physically, there's no point in having a console. And I think there is some truth in that, because one of the big perks of consoles is physical games. It is the collecting factor, alongside pick up and play, and be able to lend games and all these other perks. Incremental upgrades. Historically, you had to upgrade your console every 5 or so years. And when you did that, you genuinely got technical improvements, you genuinely got a better experience. Whereas now it's hitting a ceiling, and you can see that clearly with the PlayStation 5 Pro. The average person watching that footage is like, this looks exactly the fucking same. Why are you trying to sell me this console where it just performs a little bit better? And it's similar to the Xbox Series. It'd be similar when the Switch 2 comes out, because that will likely be as powerful as the PS5, at least, maybe a bit more. We don't know for sure, but you get to this point where you may as well just build a PC. And that's what a lot of people are going around saying, because it's true. The prices of the PlayStation 5 Pro, and potentially other systems too, it's boarding into territory where you may as well put the extra work in and build a PC. Where a lot of the positives of having consoles are starting to be outweighed by these other things. And that's something that I think we need to talk about a bit more. What do I think will happen next? Well, in the near future, we're going to get the PlayStation 5 Pro. I think it is a niche product for a niche audience. It'll be a very niche fan for PlayStation consoles, or really hardcore console fans that may or may not want to play games digitally or physically. They may be fine digital, they may be fine physical. They will buy it because they really are die-hard PlayStation fans and people with way too much money. Initially, you may get stuff sell out now because scalpers and other people want to buy stuff, but I think long-term the impact is going to be very limited, because when you see that stuff and just see what is essentially a massive rip-off, people are just going to stick to the base PS5. And that's if you want a PS5. It's similar to the series as well, and even Switch and Switch 2 will have a similar issue. because much like the PS4 and PS5, you're still getting physical games for the PS4. I recently played through Visions of Mana, and I can go into a game shop and get a physical copy of that for PlayStation 4 here in Europe. Even though it's on PS5 too, you can get it on PS4, and there are many other examples of this. Visual novels, another release I played. Everlasting Flowers, Yuri VN. In Japan, it's on PS4. There's no PS5 version, and it's on Switch, of course, obviously, and PC. But you don't need PS5 for it. You can just get it on PS4. I mean, it is a visual novel, but still brand new releases only come into PS4 in terms of Sony in Japan, because, and I think that factors into PS5 and PS Pro. It's also going to be an issue with the Switch too, because games are still going to come to the Switch as well. And even if there are certain big budget titles that are getting skipped over from the base Switch to the Switch 2, you're still going to have trouble with people not wanting to upgrade or seeing no point in upgrading. And this is why, as much as I'm happy to see the Switch 2 finally coming out, I don't think it's going to do as well. I think it'll be like the jump between the DS and the 3DS. The DS had the right hits at the right time with various unique innovations, the Blue Ocean strategy Nintendo had, whereas the Switch had the pandemic bump because people were forced to stay at home because capitalist governments had to actually give a shit about public health and collective stuff, and now it's like, oh no, the pandemic's over. And by the way, your friends are still going to become disabled and there ain't nothing you can fucking do about it. Tangent aside, the Switch benefited from this boom, and that was why it became such a massive success as well, and brought people into gaming alongside other things. That may not be replicated again, especially when you consider other factors, which I'm going to come on to, because yes, we're going to talk about systemic stuff too. In terms of longer term stuff, I believe physical games and physical support for consoles will always exist, but I do think it's going to become largely monopolised by Nintendo, and maybe a potential new entrant into the market if they decide to take that risk. PS6, I think, will have some physical support. I've seen people speculate that they think Sony is going to stop releasing physical games and drop support for the PS6, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll try to make it harder, like with the PS5 Pro. They're clearly trying. Even back as far as the PSP Go, they were trying to pull this crap. I don't think it's going to work, but I do think it's a real possibility. I do think physical games will go the way of vinyl collecting. So I am younger than vinyl. I was not born in the generations of vinyl. But one reason why I love vinyl making a resurgence is because I believe the same is going to happen in physical games. You just have to wait it out, and then you can just get games physically. And just like, they'll have them. And even games that are digital only now will get physical releases, and it still makes sense for consoles. The way it makes sense for PC. It makes sense. It really does make a lot of sense. In terms of exclusive games, I also think they will cease to exist outside of Nintendo platforms. Nintendo, I think, could even start porting things to PC because easy money. And investors will probably want it as well. They've asked about it. And it would make no sense for the new stuff because if they do that, they'll go the way of Sony and Microsoft. But I think old stuff, at least, would be great to bring to PC. You've probably already worked this out as well, because I think companies have increasingly been trying to send this message that consoles themselves, they are becoming less important, and whether or not you want to accept that or not, that is what is happening. It's very much about the games. If consoles have any point above all the other pros and cons mentioned, it's about what games you can play on the systems. Even when you exclude exclusives, there are still differences, and it mainly depends on where the games are made as well as subgenres. And so that's why I'm going to split this into Western games and Asian games for this next section about the games and consoles. Now, for Western games, there isn't really a divide between consoles, as people increasingly do not care and will get games wherever they play. Like, this is why you're seeing Western embrace digital games instead of physical, because they don't care. Like, they don't care. And this applies to all genres, all regions, across all platforms. I think an exception would be technical ports. It tends to be Western games that don't run very well. Unless, of course, you're developing primarily for games like on the Vita in Japan, where if you have a Vita, the ports are absolutely fucking shit. And the Switch was very similar to that respect for some games. But it was, with the Vita, it was more Japanese games, but with the Switch, it's Western games as well. This is why you had so many incomplete releases, like the Borderlands collection that you had to download shit on. But again, it was mostly big budget games, especially the blockbusters, the annual releases, the EA, FC Sports, or whatever the fuck they call it now. Indie developers are a bit different because due to budget constraints, they will usually focus on one or two platforms first, like Switch and PC or PS4 and PC. So they may release on other platforms later, but for the most part, indie games will come to PC at least, consoles later on as a priority. after the initial release, but it depends on the game. A lot of Western indie games will only ever come to PC as well, so that's worth bearing in mind. Asian games is different because it depends on Japanese gaming, which is the main industry, as well as the increasingly growing Asian market. For Japanese gaming, this will be synonymous with the Switch 2 and the PC. Sony, with the PS5 Pro announcement, one of my biggest takeaways, especially with the price tag, they have killed any chance of a PS5 import scene. They've completely killed it. And especially because there's going to be likely no Vita 2, Japanese fans have been shat on so much by Sony the last 5 years. They'll just jump to Switch 2. And this is why PlayStation has been in decline. And I've read people say that even PC gaming is getting bigger in Japan now, in part thanks to Sony ruining their reputation there. No Vita 2, overpriced stuff, shut in Japan studio, only caring about the West, with Astro Bot being the sole exception of the last few years. And even then, they may not invest more in that stuff. Whereas with the Switch 2, you're going to get Nintendo stuff, AA stuff, third-party support's going to move over to the Switch 2. There have been developers throughout the Switch's life that have been reluctant to move over. Most of these companies have moved over. You probably know of a certain company that hasn't, which I've talked about on this channel before, but I'm not going to talk about them directly here because they are an outlier. But any other stragglers like that company and anyone else I don't know about, they'll all move over because that's where the money is, because the PlayStation market in Japan has shrunk so much that I don't think Sony are going to recover it. They might have to write it off and start again with the PS6. And they'll have a chance, unlike Xbox, because Xbox has been irrelevant in Japan for a very long time now, whereas Nintendo have always dominated. Even back during the Vita PSP games, Nintendo still were a bit more dominant, but at least had competition. Now they just, well, don't. And this means that Japanese developers are going to develop their exclusive titles, as well as any noteworthy ports like visual novels. They're going to focus primarily on Nintendo platforms as well as PC. And any PlayStation stuff, there's going to be no exclusives. Even with the PS4, there's a few import titles, things like Idolmaster, that had some PS4 releases that never got localized. Strange City Shrouded in Shadow, that's another exclusive title from Granzella, which is a licensed game and Namco. Even things like Utawarerumono Zan 2, which did come to PS4 and PS5, that's Japanese exclusive for now. It's probably going to come to PC. Now, obviously, the first game's coming, but that's speculation. But the point is, it was made for PS4 and PlayStation's exclusives. You're not going to get that anymore. There'll be some physical exclusives for titles that are released worldwide that probably have English to cater to importers, but in terms of all new stuff, it's not going to happen. Aside from like maybe one or two titles and people that from Japanese developers are really stubborn, you're not going to get them anymore. They're all going to be on the Switch. Sony have just burnt those bridges, so if you care about Japanese games and region exclusives, you will realistically need to get a Switch because that's where they're going to be. And even like visual novels like Otome games, many of them are not going to go to PC, so you gotta get a console. As for other parts of Asia, this really depends because both PC and console markets have grown in Asia in recent years. And this is thanks to the Chinese government unbanning console games there. You can now legally sell your games in China, even though realistically if you were gaming in China over the past 20 years, you already just import your shit from the grey market anyway. I know I would if I lived there, because nobody cares. Asian developers, they tend to be more like the West in terms of they develop for all platforms now, but especially PC and the Switch and Switch 2, because that's where Asian games tend to make and where they tend to sell. That's where their stuff's going to be, so that's where they're going to put their stuff. And of course, this is going to change more over time as the market grows. You've got developers like the Stellar Braid developers Shift Up. They didn't do a PC port at launch, but they're very likely going to do one, and that will be PS5 and PC. That's where their main focus is going to be. There's also Black Myth Wukong, and putting aside the fact that developers are absolutely terrible people, the game did well in China, and it will very likely come to other platforms. PS5, PC, it'll probably come to Switch 2 in series. Like, it's done well. It is objectively done well. They're going to make it multi-platform. Even if it's niche outside of China, it's done really well. It's grown in the market. And finally, before wrapping up this video, I want to talk about the possibility that maybe these changes are a good thing. We need a more sustainable future where people buy less stuff. And I think this is something that people who are so used to collecting, who are so used to things as the status quo now, they're very resistant to it, and they don't think about these other things. So if consoles no longer become relevant, and the console market congregates around one or two platform holders like Nintendo and PC, maybe that'll be better for the planet, maybe it'll be better for people's wallets. It's worth adding that due to the economic crisis that is permanently intrinsic to capitalism, especially since 2020. The newest hardware isn't going to sell as well as many people think, and this is something I alluded to earlier with the Switch 2 as well as the PS5 Pro. People don't have the money, even if they wanted to, they don't have the money. But even if they had the money, they may not want to buy stuff because thanks to having to hold on to the PS4 on the Switch for so long, I think more people are realising that you don't need the latest tech. And with games becoming to more platforms, you can just buy the games you want to play on the platforms you like. And people are increasingly okay with that. And I think that is overall a good thing. And the kind of physical games is certainly sad. As someone who likes physical games, if you collect physical games, you probably feel the same way. But physical games being gone doesn't mean gaming will end. The same applies to Microsoft moving away from having consoles. Sega moved away from consoles 20 years ago with the Dreamcast, which recently turned 25 by the way. They still exist, people still love them, Sega still acknowledge their legacy, they've done the mini consoles. Maybe it's not a bad thing. And I think it will be hard, but I think people will accept it, whatever happens. If it means physical games are gone, people would accept that. If it means Sony and Microsoft, or even Nintendo were to leave game development or gaming hardware, they'd accept it. And if people were to accept that gaming has hit a ceiling and there's literally no more differences between PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro, or even the PS4 and the PS5, that's also okay. And I think this is something that people need to be more open to and accept that it may be a thing. And like building a happy medium with both what people hope gaming will be like and what gaming will become. And that includes really re-evaluating whether consoles have a place, not just in their own personal gaming lives, but in life in general, the world around them. Because it's not just about video games. Video games are awesome, as well as hardware that you can play them on, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So I'm going to leave on those thoughts because I think this is the kind of thing that people need to go away and sit with, especially now the PS5 Pro discourse will have died down a bit by the time I upload this, and also the Switch 2 reveal, which, while people will be hyped for that, this is still worth thinking about too. If you want to see more discussion videos and things like this, and reviews about JRPGs and VNs, which is primarily what I specialise in, and also why I tend not to care about the latest graphically demanding stuff to begin with, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing, becoming a channel member, various other things that relate to that, algorithm boosting stuff, etc. and so forth. Thank you so much everyone. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.